So I was called to speak to you tonight on the question of America and Mesopotamia. And my impression is the following, that people like yourselves come to events like this not just to listen but to talk and to ask. So I'll condense myself as much as an egomaniac can on this point, with a big subject can on this point. And I know I know what baggage I bring with me. It's two kinds. The first is that several of you have already heard from me today, one way or another. And I'm really, really going to try not to repeat myself. Nobody remembers how many husbands Barbara Hutton actually had. But I think it was the sixth one who, being interviewed on his wedding night, said that he knew what he was supposed to do, but he wasn't sure how to make it interesting. I shall try and rise above that. Much more, though, I have to rise above the fantastically, what Orwell called, when speaking about Kipling, the large and vague impression under which almost everyone in our culture labors that the United States has no business in Mesopotamia to begin with and would be better off extricating itself. This impression, formed and crystallized and disseminated by most of my profession, most of the academy, most of the political class, has to be revisited, in my view, and I want to do it by first conceding what I think is its strongest point. If there are two countries in the world that should never have met, ever, they would be the United States and modern Iraq. Look at the condition in which the United States was and Iraq was when the most recent encounter took place. We didn't have an intelligence agency that had anyone who could really speak any Arabic. And in that agency and others where anyone could speak Arabic, the likelihood would be that they would be dismissed for practicing homosexuality. You have to, in order to understand the complete weirdness of Washington, you have to be able to picture this. Do you speak Arabic and Farsi? I don't have to answer that question. Don't ask, don't tell. If the answer is yes, it's a bit iffy. What is your interest in these Middle Easterners? I start with a microcosmic picture of how bad things were. I had a president who almost certainly did not know the difference between Iraq and Iran. We had a CIA that boasted of its role in having brought Saddam Hussein to power in the first place. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd done that, would you A, boast about it, or B, not boast about it? They boasted about it. We had a Baptist born-again veteran president who never shuts up, whose proudest boast was that he had given permission to Saddam Hussein to invade Iran, Persia, an ancient civilization, leading to a war in which we think not less than 1.5 million young Iranians and Iraqis lost their lives between roughly 1980 and roughly 1985. I've been to the cemeteries in Dieppe and in Vimy and elsewhere, as I'm sure some of you have, and I've been to the main cemetery in Tehran. You haven't seen what a war cemetery can look like till you've seen a thing like that. We had a Secretary of State who's considered to be the wisest man in our country, a complete crook and scumbag called Henry Kissinger, whose main comment on that combat was that he wished it could go on longer and kill more people so that they could all lose. That was considered statecraft in our terms. And who had, after a brief flirtation with the aspirations of independent Iraqi Kurds, abandoned them to their fate at Saddam Hussein's hands without telling them that he was going to do so, thus increasing the number of people who were killed in the reprisals and enormously increasing among the only pro-American population of Iraq the suspicion that the United States had no real serious moral interest or right to express one in that country. Shall I say more about the completely disqualified nature of American statecraft and politics in this matter? Yes, I will say a few things more. I am certain in my own mind, from interviews private and public, and from other researchers that, that President Bush Sr., George Herbert Walker Bush, did give Saddam Hussein a permission to occupy at least part of Kuwait in 1990, 1991. I think it's a certain thing beyond doubt that his ambassador, April Glaspie, was empowered by the State Department to say that if Saddam Hussein wanted only to straighten the borders of Kuwait, to take, to be exact, some of you will know exactly what I mean, the Rumaila oil field, the offshore islands of Bubiyan and Warba, and in other ways to square off the border, that would not be considered in advance by the United States to be a casus belli. That it wasn't quite understood in Washington that Saddam Hussein was a megalomaniac and would not, once he'd begun invading Kuwait, cease. And as a result, extraordinary lies had to be told about the origin of the war, atrocity stories had to be invented, and ultimately quite large massacres of Iraqi civilians and soldiers had to be conducted in order to do what had to be done, the recovery of the state of Kuwait. I remind you, a member state of the United Nations, of the Arab League and of the non-aligned movement, as once again a state independent of Iraq and not the private property of a psychopathic, sadistic crime family. And I'll pause there just to say that suppose there had been these exaggerations, as there were, we were told atrocity stories that weren't true. The Iraqi army had thrown Kuwaiti babies out of incubators and left them to die on a cold floor. Not so. That the Iraqi army was poised on the border of Saudi Arabia to plunge towards Riyadh. Not so. That even if these were exaggerations,